What do you consider to be the primary benefit and reason for this movement? The primary benefit and the primary reason.
Article 4, Section 4 is very clear in the Constitution. It guarantees, the federal government will guarantee all states a Republican form of government. Republican in this context means representative. So how can one have representation when the northern third of the geography of any given state has about 2% of the representation within that state? It can't be. Now, representation drives everything else. Representation drives the economy, representation drives civil rights, representation drives land use, land planning, regulatory environments, business climates, taxation rates, everything, down to how your car is licensed. Adequate representation must be in place before any of those other things can work. We have a couple of good examples of that. For example, CARB. California Air Resources Board. The CARB laws were essentially passed by urban legislators whose everyday constituents don't pay any of the taxes. Now, what happens is here, as Tom said so appropriately, one size fits all can't work in a state that's 800 or 900 miles long. It can't work. So when you walk outside your door in Los Angeles and you can't see the sky, even though the Indians used to call that the Valley of the Smoke, and you probably never could see the sky, they decided that they needed some pretty serious laws about diesel emissions. Now, we can argue the science all day, but all of that's irrelevant because it's a fait accompli. But what happened now is we have a place where the air is clean enough that it would set the standard for the nation, and yet we've lost thousands of trucking jobs because of the CARB regulations designed to help Los Angeles air quality. The fire tax is indicative. It's not a deal breaker, but it's indicative of the climate, where urban legislators largely voted on and passed a tax. They don't call it a tax, that's in court, but it is a tax to the people who have to pay it. They largely passed a tax that their constituents don't have to pay. What a wonderful general fund revenue generator that is when you can enact a law that affects someone 9 hours away from you, and the people who put you in that chair don't have to pay the tax. You could keep doing that all day. That's just an example of how representation drives everything else in your state. So in our new state, when we had one senator for each county and we had one representative for every 30,000 people, which is an adequate model of representation, those kinds of things couldn't happen because cities would not be able to dictate politics to rural areas, and rural areas, conversely, would not be able to dictate policies to cities. You would have forced cooperation in the legislature.